Hello there, my name is Solmaz and you are listening to Tabling Thoughts podcast. In this podcast, I talk about my experiences as a relationship coach and psychotherapist. The little things that I noticed in my clients' day-to-day lives, which may affect the quality of their lives and relationships enormously, and for some reasons, they don't pay that much of attention to them. As I mentioned, I'm a relationship coach and I also practice as a psychotherapist in Ontario, Canada. In order to get more information about me, you may check my Instagram account, YouTube, or my other podcasts via the links in description. This is 26th episode of Tabling Thoughts podcast, and I'm going to talk about generational trauma. Generational trauma, also known as intergenerational trauma, is the psychological and emotional pain that is passed down from one generation to the next. It happens when unresolved trauma experienced by parents, grandparents, or even earlier ancestors affects the mental and emotional well-being of their descendants. This kind of trauma doesn't just stay with one person, of course. It ripples through families and communities. It can manifest in behaviors, beliefs, and coping mechanisms that are unconsciously adopted by the next generation. So let's see, how does generational trauma work? When someone experiences trauma, such as war, abuse, discrimination, or poverty, their nervous system, emotional responses, and even DNA can change. These changes can then be inherited or learned by their children, who may internalize the trauma even if they haven't directly experienced it. Imagine a family where a grandparent survived war. They might develop a scarcity mindset, always worrying about money and food. Their children growing up in that environment might absorb this fear and pass it down again, even if they never experienced hunger themselves. To be able to identify generational trauma, you need to be cautious of the signs of such trauma. Signs like persistent anxiety or fear without a clear cause. In my coaching practice, I had a client once who shared they grew up in a calm household, yet constantly feared something bad would happen. That was a repetitive behavioral pattern of their parents. After digging deeper, we realized their parents, who had lived through political instability, knowingly passed down their deep-seated fears about safety to them. Another sign to mention is difficulty forming secure relationships. In my practice, I can see how cultural or family expectations shape our ability to trust and connect. I have even noticed that some people either cling too tightly in relationships or push people away out of fear. Again, in my coaching practice, I had a client who had emotionally unavailable parents and they struggled with commitment. Anytime a relationship became serious, they felt suffocated and pulled away. Later in the coaching sessions, my client could see how the repeating patterns of their parents have unknowingly passed down to them. Another sign could be overprotectiveness or hyper-independence. I have a question here for you. Do you resonate more with overprotectiveness, meaning being extra cautious, or hyper-independence, feeling that you have to do everything alone? One of my clients' mother had grown up in extreme poverty, overly protective of finances. Even though my client was financially stable, she felt guilty spending money on herself and would overwork herself out of fear of losing everything. And when we digged down there, we noticed that the main fear of losing everything was the fears that her mother growing up had been ingrained in her mind. The fourth sign comes to my mind is feeling responsible for family pain. Many of us, especially in close-knit families, feel like we must take care of everyone's emotions. Have you ever felt like this? That if your parents or loved ones are struggling, it's somehow your job to fix it. Again, another example of one of my coaching clients is a client who had a father who always unloaded his emotional burden on my client. From a young age, my client became the therapist of the family. As an adult, my client felt exhausted and struggled to set boundaries. They realized that breaking this cycle meant learning to put herself first without guilt. We talked about clear boundary settings when it comes to emotional boundaries. The fifth and last sign is unexplained guilt or shame. If you have ever caught yourself feeling guilty for resting, succeeding, or setting boundaries, that's a form of generational trauma. Do you recall any moment when you felt bad for putting yourself first? I had a client who was raised by immigrant parents who always felt guilty for wanting more in their life. Her parents struggled to build a life from scratch, and my client felt that if she pursued happiness or ease, she was betraying their sacrifices. Learning to embrace her own dreams without guilt was a major turning point in the coaching practices we had. Going through the signs of generational trauma, let's talk about major causes of such trauma. The first cause is family abuse and neglect. When a parent grows up in a home filled with physical or emotional abuse, they may unconsciously continue the cycle, believing that's how relationships work. A child who grew up with a harsh, critical parent may struggle with self-worth and later on in life become a parent who is either overly critical or emotionally distant to their own children. Another major cause of generational trauma could be war, violence, and forced migration. People who lived through war, genocide, or displacement often pass down the emotional weight of that experience. Fear, distrust, and survival-based behaviors become ingrained in the family culture. A refugee family who fled a war-torn country may avoid discussing emotions or struggles because they associate survival with emotional suppression. Their children, in turn, may struggle with emotional expression. Racism and systematic oppression could be another cause of generational trauma. Communities who have faced long-term oppression, whether due to race, religion, or social class, carry deep wounds. These wounds shape how future generations see themselves and the world. A Black mother having faced racial discrimination throughout her life might teach her children to be cautious and expect unfair treatment. This can create a cycle of fear, stress, and hypervigilance that affects future generations. Poverty and financial struggle is another cause of generational trauma. Growing up in financial instability creates stress and anxiety that can be passed down. Parents who have struggled to make ends meet may raise children who either fear financial insecurity or overwork themselves trying to escape it. Imagine a father who grew up in extreme poverty. That person might be overly controlling about money, leading his children to develop financial anxiety or an unhealthy work-life balance. So we talked about the causes and signs of generational trauma. Let's see how to break the cycle of generational trauma. The good news is that generational trauma doesn't have to define us. Healing is possible with awareness, action, and intentional change. The first step is recognizing that generational trauma exists. You may ask yourself, what fears or anxieties have been passed down in my family? What coping mechanisms have I learned from my parents or grandparents? For example, if your family always avoids discussing emotions, start having open conversations about feelings with your own children or loved ones. The second and most important step is seek therapy or counseling. Therapy, especially trauma-informed therapy, can help break unhealthy cycles. Working with a professional can help you process past pain and develop healthier coping strategies. After acknowledging the pain, seeking help, we need to create new family patterns. Consciously choosing new behaviors can disturb old cycles. This might mean practicing open communication, setting healthy boundaries, and prioritizing emotional well-being. If past generations coped with stress through silence or aggression, you can start practicing mindful conversations and emotional validation with your children and educate yourself and your family. Understanding trauma and its effects can be empowering. Books, podcasts, and support groups can provide valuable insights and tools for change. And give yourself grace, my friends. Healing generational trauma isn't about blaming past generations. It's about creating a healthier future. Breaking cycles takes time, patience, and self-compassion. My friends, generational trauma may shape us, but it doesn't have to define us. By acknowledging the past, taking actions, and embracing change, we can heal ourselves and build a healthier foundation for future generations. Now I have a question for you. Do you recognize any of these patterns in your own life? What kind of generational cycles are you ready to break? Please leave a comment and let me know what are your thoughts about this concept. Until next episode, be kind to yourself and take good care of yourself.